Okay, good morning. I'm really glad to be here, and I'll try to keep it lively. I know you've been here for several hours, and I have some participatory activities, so that'll keep things a little bit lively. First thing I wanted to let you know is about our Center on Disability and Development at Texas A&M. Our center is, wait a minute, this way? Are you flipping or am I flipping?
Yep, that's right. There it is. Try.
Okay, there we go. Okay. So our Center on Disability and Development is funded through the Administration on Developmental Disabilities, and we're actually partners with 3 other agencies, one of whom that you've heard from today. We are a part of a national consortium on university centers on developmental disabilities. Every state in the union has one. The bigger states have 2, so we're Texas, so we get 2. One is at A&M and one is at that other university that uses orange. No, we leave that actually rivalry on the football field. We work really well with our center at the University of Texas at Austin, really value them as partners. We also have a sister agency through the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, and then also for what I have here on the slide is Advocacy Inc., but it's now been retitled Texas Disability Rights, and it's my understanding that your session on service animals and ADA was from somebody from Texas Disability Rights. And at a state level, we meet together once every quarter, and we try to work together to maximize our resources. At Texas A&M, our mission is to support self-determination and community integration and the quality of life for persons with disabilities. We have lots of different projects, what I have on the back table, if you're interested in our other disability-related projects, is kind of a wheel here that tells you about all the things that we do. My project is Project RED, which is research and education on disaster and disability. And my interest in disability goes back 20 years. I was a special educator, and then I ran a training program for teachers who were gaining knowledge about developmental disabilities. My transition into the disaster field happened, as has happened with a lot of people. In 2009, I started my 2005, I started my sabbatical on August 27th, and then on August 29th, if you'll remember, that's when Katrina made landfall. I applied to my dean. I said, you know, I want to be part of this disaster relief. To make a long story short, I ended up going to Orlando and having FEMA training and spending the next month 7 days a week, 12 hours a day in a DRC in Austin. When I came back to the university, what I really wanted to do is do high quality research, education, outreach on disaster and services for people with disabilities in disaster. So that is how I got my start. Now I direct Project RED, as I said, and this is none of this is coming up. Well, it's flipping, but there's nothing on the slide, which is really odd. Okay. I think there's an interface. There's an interface problem here. The background's not showing up. Okay, well, I'll talk through it and then flip to where we need to go. Okay, so I direct Project RED at Texas A&M, and again, what we focus on is developing research-based products and disseminating them to the citizens of the state of Texas. One of the things that we have with Project RED is this Texas Guide to Support and Services for People with Disabilities. Each year we go to state agencies and advocacy organizations, and we asked people would they be willing to serve in the case of a disaster, answering questions, providing referrals. And so on our website at Project Red, we have this list of services, which I would show you really big if it was working on the screen, which it's not. And then we also have a acronym guide. In emergency management, you know, we use lots of different acronyms, DRC, FEMA, EOC, etc. In the disability field, we use lots of acronyms. And so that is another product that is available on our website. And I'm going to see if, no, still, it's just not, my text is not showing up on there. We also have a directory of community resources that we've developed. Many times in disaster, what you want to know is you want to know where are companies that have accessible transportation, where are accessible housing outlets, where are interpreters that are nearby. So we have a directory of community resources that is available and searchable by zip code. And I'll be showing you that in a minute as well. And then we have, what I was talking to you about today is our tips for first responders. And our sister center at the University of New Mexico developed a collection of laminated sheets that very simply give you pointers on how to respond in emergency situations. Basic information about communicating, about keeping families together, about things to consider, for example, when someone is in a wheelchair and you're needing to do transfers and that kind of information. What we've done is we have taken that information and we put it in accessible format. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to use all of these products that we were producing on paper and figure out a way to make it just-in-time accessible to you in the midst of disaster, something that was very usable, very portable. And we surveyed emergency managers and VOADs, and we talked to them about, okay, it's really great, you know, that I'm developing these paper products or we have these laminated cards, but when you're in the midst of it, you're not going to be carrying this stuff around with you. And so, what would really work? One of the things that we found out from surveying our emergency managers is that many people have cell phones, but they're not allowed to download apps. Or that the process, the interface between the apps and different kinds of cell phones or smartphones or iPads is kind of complicated. So we wanted to take that into consideration. We wanted to incorporate these print-based materials that we had that were helpful, but again, you're not going to be carrying them around with you. And then to incorporate a web-based database. We wanted you to be able to, whatever zip code you're in Texas, put in your zip code and figure out what are disability-related organizations, resources, supplies. If any of you ever been part of an organization, you try to develop a resource list or a directory, the difficulty with that is the minute you develop a directory, it starts going out of date. People, quit, their telephone numbers change, projects go away. And so what we developed is we developed basically a wiki, like Wikipedia, where different community organizations would upload their information. We'd give them a template, and so the organizations would be responsible for keeping their information fresh, and that we could add over time this community resource and make it available to people who needed resources related to disability. And then we did some beta testing on our product with emergency managers and asked them what worked, what didn't work, okay? So that's what I'm gonna show you here. So with our tips for first responders, and I have little cards here that I'm passed out. This is not the actual product though. The actual product, how many of you have a cell phone with you or a smartphone with you today? Okay, or an iPad or whatever. Okay, this is gonna be the first talk you've ever had where the speaker says, pull out your cell phone or your pad and turn it on, okay? And I'll pass these around just so that you have them. Feel free to take two. And use your browser and go to disabilitytips.tamu.edu. And if you don't have a smartphone, or if you don't have a computer, or you don't have an iPad, or what have you, don't worry about it. I'll talk you through it. If you do have it, you can go to that site, and I'll highlight some features. But go ahead and play while I'm talking through it, because what we want you to be able to do is to know that we have this for you, and for it to be fresh on your mind when you are in the midst of a disaster. Okay, so did everybody get the website, right? disabilitytips.tamu. An entry page where we have a list of different types of disabilities that you most commonly encounter, particularly in shelter situations. And so you see the category of mobility impairments, you see the category of cognitive impairments, and under cognitive impairments, we are addressing the needs of people with intellectual disabilities, traumatic brain injury, and even Alzheimer's. And then you see the category of mental illness, and as you know, that becomes a concern in shelter situations, autism, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, etc. And so on that front page, those are the basic tips that we want first responders to have. But in addition to that, oh, I know what we can do. Can you go to the website or no?
No.
You can't go to the website. Okay. So in addition to that, what we have at the bottom of each of those screens is we have organizations who we've surveyed, and we've said, okay, in the case of a disaster, would you be willing to answer questions and respond to people who need information about these particular types of disabilities? And they have said yes. We also have a web connection that you can go to through those sites, and then also phone numbers. In addition, what we have on the app is we have a list of acronyms. As I said earlier, emergency management has a lot of acronyms, and also the disability field has a lot of acronyms. And so we've looked at the most common disability-related acronyms, and we have listed those there for you. That's also on the very front page of the app, the entry home page, and you can go in and look at acronyms through that. Next, we have Texas resources for you. And that essentially is taking our list of different organizations in the emergency, in the state that would be willing to answer questions in the case of a disaster. For example, we have a connection to the Department of State and Health Services. We have connections to Texas Disability Rights. And we have a connection to the Independent Living Research Utilization at TIER, which Lex Frieden heads. And so these are all places that you can feel pretty confident that you can call, and if the person who answers the phone doesn't have an answer for you, they can get you in touch with somebody. The last thing that we have, and you can enter through the homepage, is we have our directory of community resources. And through our directory of community resources, When you go through there, you can search for services one of two ways. One, you can say, I'm looking at housing, I'm looking at transportation, I'm looking at medical services, and you can search for those different resources by zip code, or you can just by zip code search. What is on our directory of community resources is completely and entirely dependent on the organizations, on the disability-related organizations that they upload their information. If you see information, if you're part of a disability-related organization and your contact information is not correct, you can actually go into the database and change it on your own to make sure that it's there. Okay. We have at this point all the different regions in Texas. That information comes up. And so we've especially done a good job, I think, in the Houston area to search for disability-related organizations. It really helps when you belong to a university. You can have all these helpful people called undergraduates help you out getting this kind of information. The screen's not coming out, but through our directory of community resources, you can look at advocacy, assistive technology, communication, daily living support, early intervention, etc. Okay, so what our mobile tips does is integrate these different projects, give you something that you can have in your hand in the midst of disaster, and gives you a short list of organizations that have agreed to answer questions in the case of disaster. You can also access the information separately. Our directory of community resources you can access through your computer as well, but that gives you an extra database that you can go through as well. And one thing that I would definitely say about technology is you think you have it all down pat, but then the moment you use it, sometimes it doesn't work, just like in this moment. So it's always good to have a backup. And of course, one of the things of concern in disaster is that you have to recharge, you have to have access, right, to electricity to keep your phones charged and your computers charged. And we certainly saw that after Hurricane Ike, how you had to conserve electricity, battery charge in your phones and in your computers to be able to use that kind of equipment. So I am sorry this did not display, but what I would be very open to doing and comfortable doing, no, nothing's displaying, okay? I swear I had a presentation there. What I'd be very glad to do is, beyond the mobile tips, one of the areas that I've spent the last 10 years on is doing research on disaster and people with disabilities. So if you have some research-based questions, if you have any census questions, if you would like to know about any trends in the state of Texas, I also serve on the State of Texas Functional Needs Task Force along with Melanie, and I'd be very glad to open it up to those sorts of questions as well.
Before we do questions, I just want to remind everyone that the green sheet in your folder with the website on it, Laura's presentation will be uploaded on there as soon as possible, so we'll be able to see the whole presentation anyways.
Yeah.
Was there any questions? Are you guys just trying to get out early for lunch?
Yes.
Everyone's like, okay, well, thank you very much, Laura. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties.
Okay, it happens.